I'm a farmer in Cambridgeshire and Rutland, a farming business there. I've been doing farm business consultancy for over 30 years, UK and internationally. I'm technical with one hat on. I'm technical director at the Royal Agricultural Society of England, and I'm also a non-exec director of AHDB, which we all pay a levy for, and currently the interim cereals and oilseeds chair for the second time in a few years. So looking after this sector. And just because I like a challenge, as of Monday, I'm a non-exec director of the Rural Payments Agency, because that's something that really needs sorting out. So just another little challenge. Okay, so I was asked to come and talk about resilience and what all that means. And a good place to start, I suppose, is what is resilience? Well, a definition of what resilience is it's the capacity to withstand or recover quickly from a difficulty or a shock. It's being able to return to a previous good condition. Okay, but the question is, resilient to what? Yep, it could be an environmental shock or a change. As Henny said, we've seen some fairly lumpy weather over the last couple of years. It could be an economic shock. It could be a human shock. We saw COVID. Or it could be a societal shock. All of those things are out with our control mainly, but how do we deal with those as farmers running a business and running or operating a system which is subject to all these potential different things? What are our options in terms of specialisation, diversification, stacking enterprises? How do we deal with those shocks? What do we need to think about? What's controllable? What's within our control and what's out with our control, and how do we deal with those challenges? So that's really what we're going to try and cover today. And if you thought you were coming to learn about what's the most resilient wheat variety, you're going to be sorely mistaken, because I'm going to take you to places that perhaps you hadn't thought about. And if I can just get you to think about some of the issues about resilience, how they impact your business, I think we'll be in the right place. One thing's for sure, the pace of change seems to be accelerating. We had Brexit, we've had a range of trade deals, we've got the 25-year agricultural roadmap, we've got the land use framework, we've had the Batters report, we're seeing stuff through the devolved regions happening at different paces. In some ways, Brexit seems easy now compared to some of the stuff we're leaning into. So there's a lot of stuff happening around us that all has an impact on our farming businesses and what we do on a day-to-day. And then at a bigger level, we've got climate change, which is happening. You know, there's no doubt. As Henny said, I mean, at home we've had 49 days rain out of 53, and you know that's it was the same last year. It was wet winters and it's hotter, drier summers. And 20 years ago, the Environment Agency said you're going to have hotter, drier summers and wetter winters. Seems to be starting to happen, and we've got to deal with this, or we've got to adapt. If you talk to some of our Antipodean cousins, perhaps they think we're rank amateurs at water management, and you know, the idea of having a drought here is fairly new to us, but actually we're pretty good at evacuating water. We're pretty bad at storing water on the farm. And I think water is going to have to be something we're going to have to consider more about storing it in the winter so we can use it through the middle of the summer. I have many neighbours that are involved with irrigated crops at home, and we can move from, you know, deluge into, oh my God, everything's in drought, we need to turn the pumps on very quickly, but we've been really bad at storing it. So thinking about micro storage on farm is going to be increasingly important. What about yield and productivity? A couple of graphs here. The graph on the left, I'm afraid that's a bit small, but effectively you can see the trends. That's wheat, barley, oats, oilseed, rape. We're pretty much flatlining in terms of yield, and have done for probably the last 8 or 9, 10 years. And if you take in genetic improvement into that, we're actually declining in yield. We're not increasing at all. So why is that? Why is that? Well, as the graph on the right, actually, the UK is this red line at the bottom, we're plateauing. Other countries are increasing, but they're increasing from a lower base. We yield quite high compared to a lot of other places around Europe and around the world, but our yields aren't going up. Now, is that because of genetics? Is it because of pests and diseases and climate change? Or is it actually we've been pretty good at pushing our soils quite hard, and actually the productive potential on some of those soils isn't perhaps as good as it could be, and some of the sort of soil health conditions we need to invest in again. We'll come back to that. So there's some issues there we need to deal with in terms of resilience. How many of you, well, I don't know how many insomniacs there are in the room, but how many of you have delved into the seventh climate report from the Climate Change Committee, which was published last year? It's quite heavy reading, but there's some really punchy stuff in there. If you look at some of the headline figures there, these are recommendations from the International Panel on Climate Change and the Domestic Climate Change Committee advising government, and they're looking at, or advising government, that there should be a 27% reduction in cattle and sheep numbers, 20% reduction in dairy consumption, 20% reduction in meat overall. They're looking at potential increases in crop yields, but as we've seen, where are they coming from? Because our yields seem to be flatlining. They're suggesting a massive reduction in sort of use of peatland, lowland peat for agriculture, in terms of reduced emissions from machinery, etc. There's some really punchy stuff there, which has a massive implication on our ability to farm as we do at the moment. Now, we can adapt to that, or we can challenge it, but what we do need is the right data to be able to challenge it, and that's some of the work that AHDB are working on. So all of this in the round, whether you agree with it or not, that's feeding into government policy. Whatever the colour of that government is, this is feeding into their policy, and that has an implication in terms of the farming operations that we do that we need to think about. Okay, another question. This is a bit of work AHDB did a couple of years ago, and it shows where the value is in the food chain. So at the top here, we've got non-residential food catering, so cafes like downstairs. We've got food retailing, we've got wholesaling, we've got food manufacturing, and the little blue bit at the bottom is agriculture. So currently we're around 7.5 to 9 and a bit % of the value of the food sits inside the farm gate, in the ring fence of the farm. 90% of that, somebody else is actually making money from. How many farmers in the room again? All right. How many of you got a marketing budget? It's the same response wherever I ask the question. We've devolved that responsibility of farmers to somebody else in the food chain. Somebody else does the marketing, somebody else takes the value. It's an issue. We enjoy growing crops, we enjoy rearing animals. We're hopeless at marketing as an industry. We've let somebody else do it. That's why somebody else takes the value for that activity. We need to think about how we might be able to do something there. And you could argue that the likes of AHDB and other partners that we're with should be doing the marketing for us, but they are, there's a cost to that. And if we want people to pay us more, we actually have to have some activity in that area. Most businesses, we're in a business here. I reckon this business here will be probably between 4 and 6% of its turnover will be on marketing. And that's fairly standard for most businesses. It's really odd for farming. So we need to just bear that in the back of our mind. So there's some risks and changes, and those risks of change, and the accelerated pace of some of that is a bit of a concern and something we need to grapple with within farming. If we look at the big global picture, and this is very small, so I'll try and talk through and explain it. This is World Economic Forum global risks. If you look at the top left here, this is 2022, and we've got some green stuff around weather, climate change, biodiversity, some red stuff around social, some stuff around debt, and some stuff about geopolitical confrontation. Come forward just a few years, this is 2025, back end of last year, landscape looks a bit different. Cyber espionage, misinformation, disinformation, AI, technology, cyber espionage, geopolitical inequality. There's stuff that comes in around geopolitics, societal and technologies which didn't appear only 5 or 6 or 7 years ago. The world has got a little bit more unstable very recently. And that's going to, you might not think it impacts you on the farm, but let's explore how it can. A really good place to start is the work that Tim Lang's been doing, Professor Tim Lang, and he's been working on something called the National Preparedness Committee, which most of us you've never heard of. This is government work, really looking at food production and supply chain shocks, and are we ready for those supply chain shocks? He's been mapping out how our food moves through from the farm right through to people that consume it and all the actors and players in between and the processes involved, and where those potential shocks might sit in terms of economic, politics, environmental, militarily, health and social. If we look at something like our electricity grid, okay, that is actually distributed. So it's like this sort of graph on the right, bottom right here. So it's interconnected. So if one part fails, actually you can send electricity around the other way and it still gets to you. Most of our food systems are decentralized. They work through a hub process. Okay. How many supermarkets, not brands like Tesco's or Sainsbury's, or how many bricks and mortar supermarkets do you think there are in the UK? Given that something like 92% of all our food is sold through supermarkets. How many do you think there are in the UK? 10,000? Not far off. Any other bids from the floor? 20,000. No, 20,000. Okay. And how many distribution hubs are there? How many places does all the food that we grow go through as a distribution hub?
12. 50. 120.
Oh, well, this is what I like, a bit of interaction. Okay, so there are about 12,000 supermarkets in the UK, England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, and there are about 131 distribution hubs. Not very many. So what does this mean? What's the impact? Okay, so there's potential for supply chain shocks on all of those mechanisms. Whether it's energy, whether it's ransomware or bot attacks, whether it's internet failure, whether it's geopolitical risk, whether it's climate and flood. So what happens when you've got some cattle ready to go and you phone up Dovecote Park and say, I'd like to send some cattle to you, and they say, love to take it, we've been hacked. We can't take anything, and we can't take anything for the next month. And you say, well, that's not going to happen. But ask Jaguar Land Rover, or Marks and Spencer's, or the Co-op, because they're still recovering from stuff that happened in the middle of last year. Okay, that's an issue. It's an issue for us as farmers if we're selling to people that they can't feed that into the supply chain. We need to have, within our sort of risk management of the farm, we need to think about what we do in those scenarios. What about oil and gas and water? What about zoonosis? So oil and gas, well, the Strait of Hormuz has just been closed, not by the Iraqis, by Lloyd's of London. It will not let any ships through the Strait of Hormuz, and that's going to be closed for some time. Don't think that's the weekend job. That's going to affect oil, it's going to affect diesel, it's going to affect fertilizer. The price of those is going to go through the roof. What happens? How do you farm if you can't get fertilizer? How do you farm if you phone up Certas, whoever your choice of supplier is for diesel for the tractor, and they say, love to supply you, we've run out. Or it's been contaminated, or any of the above. There's stuff going on way out of our control. And I'm not trying to scare you, I'm just saying we need to put strategies in place. Local farmer to me had a power cut, not of his doing, a couple of years ago. wanted to carry on farming until he realised that all his diesel is in tanks that he can't get it out of because it's all electric. Well, the risk management is buy a hand pump. At least you can keep going. Yeah. What happens with your tractors if somebody hacks John Deere or Ford or Case or whatever, and the telemetrics on your tractor, just shut the bloody thing down. The Americans are doing it in Ukraine. At the moment, they're allowing Ukrainian tractors to work, and they're trying to disable Russian machinery on the other side of the border in Russia. And they're able to do that through satellites and everything else. So somewhere, there are some nefarious actors that can impact you on the farm. How do you do stuff? How do you carry on farming, doing the job you love, when somebody else is impacted through various mechanisms, whether it's oil, gas, water supply, climate, flood, etc. How do we farm if you can't get hold of fertilizer, seed, fuel, your internet goes down? What happens when you put the bank card in the wall and it says, sorry, it's not working, and you can't make a payment for something? What's plan B? Hasn't been a problem for everybody in the room. This hasn't been a problem for 40 years. It's staring us in the face at the moment, and all I'm saying to you is just be prepared, just in case it happens. So my sort of take-home picture is, can you function if there was a supply chain shock? Can you operate the farm, and can you thrive without those external inputs? Because we all rely on something that's out with our control to operate the systems we do. What can you build into the farming system to give you that bit of buffer? And one of those things is diversity. If you've got a bigger portfolio of things, if one thing falls over, you can carry on with the other. Okay, so diversity is one tool in terms of risk management. But diversity brings complexity, and complexity takes management. That takes management. Have you got the management time and skills and everything else to deal with more complexity, or do you need other people to help you with that? Do you look at partnerships, joint ventures? Do you let assets out to take some of the pressure off? Do you want full control or delegated responsibilities? What about funding? Talk to any of the banks. They're looking at risk management now as part of their lending strategies. They will give you preferential rates if you recognise the risks on the farms and you've mitigated against some of those risks, whether that's with the farming system or stuff that's coming from outside of the farm into the farm. Understand what your objectives are and the objectives of your business, which I'm sure you've got in hand, but really think about mapping out where those obstacles are in terms of risk and what's stopping you addressing some of those risks at the moment. Okay, that's what I'll ask you to focus on. Can you specialize? Can you diversify? You know, some people are happy with diversification, others are more comfortable in a specialized role. Both have benefits and disbenefits in terms of resource utilization, skills, management time and focus, about all your eggs in one basket. Don't bother scribbling any of this down because you're going to get all these slides anyhow to refer back to. The one thing I would say is whether you are inclined to do diversification or you are inclined to specialize. If you're inclined to do a more diverse range of enterprises, be realistic. So my own farm business, we've got quite a lot of diversification going on. I've worked with a lot of farmers who have diversified, and I think I would say every new income stream that you look at takes a darn sight more time than you thought it ever would. It costs you a lot more, and the return on investment is a lot slower than you anticipated. And a good rule of thumb for me is, if you're going to diversify, what are you going to give up first? What are you going to let somebody else do? Because how many people are not working at about 120% of their capacity at the moment? We all are. What are you going to give up or let somebody else do so you can do a diversification? Because just loading on more and more and more, that's more and more potential risk if something goes wrong. And that's where you may want to bring other people into the business with different skills, different capital, different time, because time is one of the big limiting factors to help you sort of move forward on that. Okay, just setting scene. How many of you got solar panels? couple of you. Got me thinking a little while ago. Solar panels are quite interesting from a resilience point of view, from an energy generation point of view, but they only occupy, if it's on land, about 50% of the land area. There's a lot of space in between. I've been doing quite a bit of work with a big program and a developer down in Nottinghamshire, in Newark, where we're looking at agrovoltaics. We're actually growing crops in between the solar panels. Wheat only uses 62% of the solar radiation. 40% isn't used throughout the year. If it used 100%, there wouldn't be any weeds, because weeds use the spare solar radiation, which you then have to deal with. Yeah. So if you've got energy, is quite an interesting thing. We're quite heavily reliant upon petrochemical energy in farming, both for inputs, Fert and Chem, and for motive power tractors. Energy might be something that we could all get more involved with, but actually it doesn't need to be energy or farming. There's opportunities to do both on the same parcel of land. Actually, there's nothing stopping you doing that out there now. You don't have, there's not a case of filling your IX form in saying part of solar panel, part wheat, because you don't have to fill an IX form in anymore. You can do whatever you want on the land now that you couldn't do 10 years ago. So whether it's combinables or livestock of different shapes and sizes, there's potential to stack these things together. Another take-home thing, the biggest single input to your farm is solar radiation. Whether you're a cereal farmer, a grass farmer, a forester, or a solar engineer, we're all in the same business. If that big bright ball of thing, which I haven't seen for 6 months and it came out yesterday, goes out, it's game over for us all. How do we harvest as much of that free solar energy? Because as a cereal farmer, there are periods in the year when you've got solar panels, Richard, would you turn them off in July, August and September? No, but that's what we do with cereal farming. As soon as that crop has gone golden brown, we've turned the solar radiation off. How can we capture more free input to our system and harness that to keep the soil biome alive and keep actually solar radiation feeding that engine? Okay, I tackled it on my own farm through stacking things and actually putting agroforestry. My own farm in Cambridgeshire, I've got half the farm with a mixture of fruit and cereals growing on the same, because I stack in space and time. So the canopy and the roots are operating different areas to the cereal. One is photosynthesizing from November through to July. The other is going from May to November. So there's an overlap in terms of that. Apple trees, wheat, knob of butter, splash of milk, apple pie. What's not to like? But it's about stacking different skill sets and different income streams. That's just one example. If you're a tenant, that's more difficult because you've got a perennial and annual. I actually am a tenant and I have to convince my landlord, but we did it, well, that's 20 years old now. Down in Dartington in Devon, helped the landowner, the Dartington Trust, work with the tenant farmer and 3 different operators, one growing Szechuan pepper, one growing elderflower and one growing fruit. So you're layering different tenants onto the same land parcel to provide different income streams and different management to provide different outcomes. It brings a whole different range of resilience and some challenges in terms of management, but it also brings that complexity and sort of risk management as well. Okay, we said we'd talk about soils. Let's leap around into soils a little bit. And what about healthy soils for resilience and what that all means? Well, I mentioned earlier on about yield plateaus. And actually, there's a question, have we been emptying the soil carbon account? Probably. We've probably been taking out more than we've been putting in, but there's been an economic imperative. If we look at soil organic matter levels in the UK here, we've got sands right down to clays on going vertically. We've got arable through to permanent grass, and surprisingly, a lot more organic matter under sort of clay and permanent grassland. A lot less organic matter in arable soils, especially those lighter sort of sandier soils. Not surprising. Actually, the important bit here is the date this work was last done, which is 1985. That's the last time we had a national soil survey in this country. How many people are doing soil organic matter testing now? Yeah, half the room. Good. You know what you've got, because 5 or 7 years ago, many of us weren't doing it. So knowing what you've got and what trajectory you're on is quite important. Okay. There's a bit of reward through SFI, but that's coming and going. There's pretty good data around soil degradation. Cranfield University did a big piece of work a couple of years ago, funded by DEFRA. Something like nearly half, 40% of the soil degradation is in arable or mixed systems. A bit less under grassland, but it's still happening. And that's accounted to be about £1.4 billion worth a year of soil loss, both from erosion, overland flow, degradation. And that's not the worst soil on the farm, that's the best soil. And it's taking nutrient and it's taking productive potential away with it. And we don't see it because it's quite incremental, but it's really quite important, really quite important. Nitrogen use efficiency. What's nitrogen use efficiency in the UK at the moment? Yeah, 52%. So a measure of that is tonight, when you go to the pub, get a pint, pour half of it down your front, put the rest on the table, because that's where we're starting. Now, it's a good business model for Yara. It's not a very good business model for us as a farm if we're losing half of what we got, half of what we buy. So how do we keep more of that nutrient on the farm through keeping more soil on the farm? A healthy soil is important in terms of chemistry, biology and physics. Most of you will be familiar with these sort of soil maps. So this one's showing potassium, phosphorus, manganese and pH. Okay. You will see, this is a field down near me in Cambridgeshire, chalky boulder clay, been farmed fairly conventionally, sort of rape wheat, barley rotation for quite a number of years. Bit of a hot spot going on, you can see in the sort of corner of the field. Why would we see such a hot spot or a change in that particular area? Compaction, muck, drainage, could be all of the above. The clue's in the name.
Where did the dairy used to be?
Dairy field, right? The dairy used to be just here, and you're right, the muck midden used to come out here and the cattle would gather there. The important thing here is that dairy on that farm finished in about 1990, 1991. The impact of that has a very long tail in terms of the improvement of those livestock and that muck and the muck midden brought to that area. It takes a long time for that to work out, but it also takes a long time to build it back in again. It's a long-term implication. We're all familiar with basic crop nutrition requirements in terms of NPK, etc. I'm not going to focus on this. We all recognise trace mineral requirements of different crops and the need to balance pH. Calcium's different to pH, remember. Many of us look at pH and calcium as the same thing. They're completely different. You need to understand the difference between the two. Talk to me later if you need to understand more, but important. So what's the single major elemental use on the farm? What's the thing that we need to use most of, other than sunlight?
Carbon.
Who said carbon? Well then, he's obviously read this before. It's none of these. It's carbon dioxide. In effect, we're all cellular structures. Carbon dioxide is fundamental. It's basic crop science. Okay, and the reason it's important is that where does that carbon dioxide come from? It comes from the decaying soil organic matter at or in the soil surface. Nature worked this out an awful long time ago through stomata in plants, regulates water and carbon dioxide transfer, and actually the carbon on the soil surface is releasing carbon dioxide, which the plants take up. It's right there. If that organic matter is suboptimal, the plants have to work harder to capture the carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, and they spend more energy doing it, which means they've got less energy to invest in growth. So having good organic matter in our soils is fundamental to how our plants breathe and actually grow. And we've sort of overlooked that because you can't go down the local dealer and buy a can of carbon dioxide. It's not something we can actually trade. So we've sort of forgotten about it. Soil structure is important, providing the right habitat for the biology in our soils and the root structures in our soils. Think about it a bit like a brick wall, whether you're on sand or silt or clay. Those particles aggregate together to create PEDs. It's a bit like the bricks in the wall. You can't do much about it unless you go mining. But it's the bit around the outside, the mortar. That's where the fungi and the bacteria and the polysaccharides and the glues and everything that holds it together are really important. That's the bit we can do something about. Picture from quite an old Environment Agency publication called Think Soils. Soil on the left, soil on the right, same soil. That's under a hedge. That's in the middle of the field. Just a few meters apart, managed differently, different outcomes. If you want to know what the potential of your soil is, look under the hedge. It's the same stuff that's in the field, just managed differently. I think there's pretty good evidence to show if you've got high levels of soil organic matter, it has some benefits in terms of physics, physical condition, aeration, drainage, chemistry, in terms of cation exchange capacity, in terms of buffering pH, decomposition, and also biology. Fairly good evidence to show once you get above about 20%, it gets a bit strange. But you know, most soils need to be somewhere in those sort of upper single figures, really, lower double digits. Most of the work that Yara have done has said that most of our soils have less than 5% organic matter. You know, once you get up above here, it all goes a bit strange. But actually, if we can get our organic matters around the 8 or 10%, our soils are going to function better. That will improve the cation exchange capacity. It'll change the positive and negative charge in our soils, the ability to hold on to nutrients and keep them in available forms rather than losing them out of the system. It's a bit like taking a 10-ton trailer and turning it into a 12-ton trailer. The organic matter is like a set of greedy boards. Gives you more capacity to actually cycle nutrients by altering those cation exchange charges by having more organic matter in there. But it takes time. It's an investment, but it's an investment we've been perhaps not focusing on as much as we should have done. There are other benefits. Back to water, 1% organic matter increases 170,000 litres of water holding capacity and or drainage at the other end. So thinking about how we do that's really important. We need fresh organic matter, we need humified organic matter, we need the woody stuff like this for structure, and we need the fresh stuff to feed the biology. It's a bit like going in the fridge and seeing, you know, some dried pasta in the back and a bit of leafy salad at the front. You need a bit of both. The biology is really important here insofar as, other than nitrogen, which is different, most of the other minerals in our soil are mediated in some form by soil organic, by the soil microbiome, soil biology, processed in the form that it's in to make it available to be uptaken by plants. So how many of you got cattle or sheep? Right, you give them somewhere to live and you feed them. Soil biology is no different. Give them somewhere nice to live and feed them. Otherwise they don't work. I'm a sort of recovering soil scientist, having done a master's some 30 years ago in soil science. And I used to think soils were the basis of life. Completely changed my view in 30 years. Plants. If we don't get plants growing, and it's just bare soil with nothing growing on it, set aside was the worst thing we did for our soils. If we had planted something in that was growing and improved our soils, we'd be in a better place. Leaving it bare for a long period of time and spraying it off twice a year, disaster. Growing something in it, much better. And that's what people who are, well, I'm sure we'll hear about cover crops later on, and that's part of that story. It's important, the organic matter, the solar radiation and the organic matter which ensues, and the polysaccharides and sugars that come out of the rooting system feed the bacteria and the protozoas, the fungi and the springtails and the nematodes, right down to the bigger stuff. It's all linked. Without that organic matter element derived from photosynthesis, which we can do because we're farmers, that's the key to the system. Forestry soils, fungal dominated, arable soils in the middle here somewhere, and then you've got sort of bacterial dominated at that end. Bacteria dominate first, fungi comes later. Most of our arable soils are bacterial dominated, but they need a bit more fungi. You need to move it this way a little bit. It takes a bit of time, and some inputs and some destruction through cultivations doesn't help. Our old friend the earthworm. How many earthworms in the UK? Not how many total, how many species of earthworms in the UK? Have a guess. Pretty close. 14 different species. Most of those are being compost heaps or in woodlands and stuff like that. In an arable context, there's 3 main types: Epigeics, Endogesics and Anisics. And as you can see from the sort of figure on the left, they live in different places and do different jobs. They are nutrient multipliers. What goes in the front end and comes out the back end is supercharged in terms of nitrogen, phosphate, potassium and magnesium. They're not doing it for you and me. They're another animal, as I said earlier on. They need protein and carbohydrate. Where are they getting that from? Well, these guys are chasing old plant roots. Okay? The carbohydrate's coming from the plant roots, but before the earthworms got there, because they're a bit slow, the bacteria got there and started degrading those old plant roots. And it's the bacteria that gives them the protein. Balance of protein and carbohydrate, front end goes in, back end comes out, much better. Jan van Groningen and his team at Wageningen did a big meta-analysis across soils across Europe. They said, if you've got 14 earthworms per spadeful of soil, you're going to get a 25% increase in yield of your crops compared to having no earthworms in that soil. How do you get earthworms? Provide the right habitat for them to live, feed the little buggers, provide organic matter for them to eat. If you're not doing that, if you've got no earthworms, because you haven't got anything for them to eat or you've got the wrong structure. If you're seeing earthworms, you're on the right track. That's building resilience into your farming system, building productive potential. I make no apology for mentioning mycorrhizae. If you've never heard of mycorrhizae, it's a beneficial fungus in your soils. It creates a symbiotic relationship between plant root and a beneficial fungi. The fungi takes sugars, starches, and energy and water from the plant roots. In return, it makes the plant roots up to 700 times bigger. Bigger area, better reception. Your ability to actually structure through those soils is vastly increased. The little round balls you can see here are actually, like any other fungi, they're the fungal spores for re-inoculation. This is an electron microscope in a wheat root which has been stained with a stain, and you can see the fungal spores, and you can see that the mycorrhizae are inside and outside the plant root itself. Why these are important? They produce something called glomalin or glomulin. It's the glue, the araldite, which holds your soil particles together. It's the only thing that does it. Massively important in terms of structure of our soils. Okay? But if we want that to be there, we've got to treat our soils in the right way. Lots of evidence, research evidence showing glomalin production, aggregate stability. So this is more mycorrhizae, better aggregate stability, straight line relationship. Okay? But we know there are things that increase carbon in our soils in regards to cover crops, keeping land covered, regenerative approaches. We know there's stuff that degrades carbon in our soils. And if we degrade carbon, we're effectively degrading those beneficial soil fungal relationships as well. And sometimes things go wrong, bad weather. We have to do things sometimes which upset that balance, but recognizing where we do damage and trying to rectify that damage is really a first step in addressing it. So that soil biology needs a mixture of good fungi and good structure and food, whether it's humified or whether it's fresh. I'm just going to go through there. Where do we get that organic matter? Well, you can buy it and you can transport it, but that's costly and somebody else is winning that's usually running a truck. Or you can grow it. And growing it is probably the cheapest and simplest thing you can do. And I'm sure Angus and Richard are going to talk to us more about cover crops. Some great resources on the AHDB website around cover crops, and I'm not going to delve into those, other than saying I really like what Ian Wilkinson did at Cotswold Seeds. Other companies are available. He didn't call them cover crops, he called them undercover crops. Because we need to think not only about what's happening above ground, what's happening below ground. How can we make the farm bigger, like I've done with the agroforestry, by farming vertically, by having different routes, exploiting different areas on the farm and building that resilience and providing that habitat for the earthworms in different places through a diversity of root structures. And there's lots of things you can do. This is some work that Andy Howard did, a Nuffield scholar a few years ago, looking at crop mixtures. We all grow monocultures. We grow monocultures because it's easy Our chemistry works on one thing, and we've got mechanisation, and we've got simple minds. That's not a band, but simple minds. But actually, nature doesn't. Where does nature do monoculture? Never. It has lots of different things going on. If you look out the window, there's lots of things happening in the same place. We could companion things together, and that brings more diversity and more risk management when things are challenged or go wrong. But it is more complex. So here we've got wheat and beans, beans and peas. We've got various things going on there with vetches. So Andy Howard did a lot of work on this a few years ago, looking at bicropping, and he was seeing about 15% higher yields from the combination of growing things together. You've got to be able to deal with it and separate it to be able to sell individual components or find a way to use those combined components together. And we can talk about this more later, but it's one method for sort of resilience. How many of you are growing legumes on the farm? Not many, probably about half of you. This is some data from 20 years ago. Some of this done at High Mothorpe with the ADAS site, looking at nitrogen fixation from a whole range of different leguminous covers, both things like clovers and lucernes, but always or grain legumes as well. And what you can see is quite significant levels of nitrogen fixation. And then when you terminate those, what's available immediately after termination. Quite some punchy numbers there. When you're looking at ranges of 200 or 300 kilograms of nitrogen, that's quite a lot. If we're thinking about building resilience into our systems, how about putting more legumes in? How about those volunteer beans that were in last year that are in the wheat? How about just leaving them rather than spraying them out? And can they bring nitrogen into the system so that when you can't get nitrogen or it's gone really expensive, you've used some photosynthesis to use legumes to build some free nitrogen into the system. That's a resilience pathway. Currently, only about 4% of Crop UK land has a legume in it. I think this is the single biggest opportunity for us as farmers at the moment. How do we build legumes either as companion plants or as catch crops or as cover crops into our systems for free nitrogen? Because nitrogen is going to get more and more expensive, and it's all being manufactured in the hands of people that are not on our Christmas card list. Yep. So think about how you build legumes into the system. Massive, easy win. You'll get this later, but there are a whole bunch of legumes that we've looked at here in the UK as cover crops or companion plots, both as grain legumes, as forage legumes, as other forage legumes as well, all that will grow here. Some of them, like Trifolium pendiculatus, thrive under waterlogged conditions, quite useful. Others, like drought conditions, like Trifolium, Medicago lupulana, yellow black medic, this one. So there are different things for different farms, and this is not a new idea. When the Pilgrim Fathers sailed from Europe and discovered America, apparently for the first time, no one was living there, according to Truth Social, whatever it is. They were kept alive in the first winter by following the Native Americans' Three Sisters, which was growing maize, squash, and a legume, all in the same place, stacking three things together. They didn't have to fill in IAX forms with a single crop back then. You have the potential to grow multiple things at the same time in your fields. Nothing's stopping you now. There was 5 years ago, because you had a film to fill in to meet current restrictions. You can do it now if you have the will and the right approaches. Inputs and chemistry. How do we think about resilience there? I unashamedly talked about mycorrhizae and the benefits in terms of soil structure and the glues and holding your soil particles together. Someone said to me, about 10 years ago, I'm putting some fungicides on the farm. What impact's that having on that beneficial soil microbiology, that mycorrhizae? And I said, I have no idea. So I went and asked suppliers. They didn't know. I went and then asked manufacturers, and they went, oh yeah, we've looked at some of that. Took a bit of digging. And these are generic names. Some of the products aren't available here in the UK wider. In essence, it's a mixed picture. Some fungicides kill off the harmful fungi and leave more space for the beneficial fungi. Some fungicides actually decimate the beneficial fungi. Okay, so it's quite a mixed thing. And if they're systemic versus contact, in paraphrasing, short version, contact plant applied has less damage than systemic soil applied. Okay. Mixed picture. The question you've got to take home is, if you're interested in mycorrhizae and you're interested in what the impact of fungicides might have, ask your supplier. Simple question: what impact is this product that you're trying to sell me having on the beneficial soil fungi? Because they have a duty to actually find that information out from the manufacturer and report that back to you. Okay, very straightforward. And one of those things is, you know, if you are using fungicidal seed treatments, totally recognise the need if you've got tight rotations. If your rotations have got wider, more diverse, with more cover cropping, question whether or not you need a fungicidal seed treatment every year. Okay, you might not need to, because if you want to really impact beneficial soil fungi at planting depth, evenly distributed across the farm, a fungicidal seed dressing will do the job pretty well in terms of upsetting that balance. So just question about what you're using and whether or not actually you can do things slightly differently in terms of resilience. Herbicides. Everyone uses a fair amount of glyphosate. It's widely used. Two graphs here. I'm not going to say don't use it. I just want to point out some impacts. Graph on the right is glyphosate at 3 different levels, 10 and 30 days after application. Job's a good one. What it's done is it's killed off the host plant, and therefore actually the mycorrhizal colonisation is dropping off because the host plant is dying. Herbicide's done its job. Don't have a problem with that. Graph on the left shows the impact on spore viability from beneficial mycorrhizal fungal spores to re-inoculate. Those spores you saw on the picture earlier on, those spore viability is completely knocked on its head by the herbicide application. So you're giving the beneficial soil fungi a real challenge. So one way through this is, what's the optimum pH for the water you tank mix with glyphosate for best efficacy? 4.2. Okay, what's the pH of the water you've got on the farm? Okay, so you're probably not going to hear this from the supply chain, but if you put a water buffer pre-mix, you can buffer down your water to more acidic, you'll probably cut your active ingredient use in half. But of course the supply chain don't really want to, they want to sell product. So, you know, fair enough. But if you can reduce the active ingredient by buffering down your water, you'll have less impact on soil biology like mycorrhizae. And you'll probably make a bit of a saving as well. So just work that through with your agronomist in terms of buffering down your water, because it's another fairly easy win in terms of reducing impact on biology. Actually, government programs, we've all piled into SFI and countryside stewardship. Actually, that's looking a little bit more shaky. Basing your business model around a big inclusion of that, plan for the fact that in 3 years' time, you're going to have less support. That's the reality. You've got to work out how you're going to manage that. The other thing to think about in terms of resilience to your farm business and the way you do things, for every one of you, for every farmer in the room, there's 10 people surrounding you, not in this room, but there's 10 people surrounding you on home that have a business model that's absolutely reliant on you doing exactly the same tomorrow as you're doing today. If you change your business model, it impacts their business model. That's the reality of modern trade. Okay? So if you want to make a change, just recognise that there are going to be other people around you saying, no, stay with what you're doing. Stay exactly what you're doing now, because that's robust, that works. It works for them because their business model is reliant on your business model doing exactly the same. Just recognise the pressures that are upon your business by other businesses who feed off your business. Agriculture is an extractive model. The 9% we had at the bottom there of the value in the food chain is because everybody else takes the value out of it. It's an extractive model at our cost. So when we're thinking about resilience, we need to think short and long term. We need to think about different things, for whether you own the land or rent it. Constant change requires different areas of risk management. Technical specialization or excellence in what you do does not shelter you from the risks, because there are so many things out with the control of what you do by other actors that surround you, the buyers, the input suppliers. They all have an impact on your business. Think about stacking skills, people, finance in different ways. As I mentioned earlier on, it's not very long ago that we had headage payments and milk quotas and single farm payment schemes that we all farmed to meet those requirements. They've all gone. You have the biggest autonomy and freedom to do what you want on the land, provided you're not polluting and breaking legislation. You've got the biggest freedom you've had in 40 years. And it's a new sort of inflection point for agriculture, that actually we can do multiple things out there, and we haven't got someone telling us we need to farm in a particular way to meet a particular box on a particular form. So concluding thoughts really are, think about the potential supply chain shocks which could impact your business, and what mitigations you could put in place to deal with those shocks. Really simple, create a risk register for the farm. What are the risks and how are you going to deal with them? And I'm not talking health and safety, I'm talking the ability to carry on business as usual. Just spreadsheet, what are the risks, red, green or amber, how do I deal with those? At least you've got a plan. It's a good place to start. Try and control things that others currently control that are outside your business. That's not a bad movement and strategy. Aiming for a farming system that can thrive without external inputs. More legumes, build up a bank of nitrogen on the farm, include those in the system as cover crops, as companion plants or whatever. That's a good way of reducing the risk from outside inputs. Invest in long-term soil health to build that productive potential. Harvest as much sunlight as you can. It's free, and it's the biggest single input on the farm. If you're not photosynthesizing, you're wasting time and energy. Build more photosynthetic activity, and consider where your marketing activity and budgets are placed. Try and take a bit of responsibility in terms of actually capturing some of that value by some kind of marketing activity, whatever that is. Small scale, local level, letting people know what you're doing. We've all got responsibilities there to capture the value. I suppose the most dangerous thing is, well, we've always done it this way. The one thing we're good at in farming is we're pretty decent at adapting and rising to the challenge. That's what we're good at. So that's straightforward. And actually we need to be prepared for every eventuality because we don't know what's coming over the hill. Okay, big picture stuff. Hopefully that's given you some thought about resilience, what it means to you on the farm and some of the things you can think about. Thank you.